I am going to now move to our first session of the day, which is the jurisdictional updates. And as I mentioned a moment ago, these are an opportunity for our task force executive members to share news and updates on what's going on in their jurisdictions. And the first speaker to speak today is Tom Cullen, who's the administrator of the Office of Spill Prevention and Response at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So Tom, take it away.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and good morning to all of you. Very impressed to see how many first-time participants.
We have a transition happening, so hang in there.
Oh, can I talk over it?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I was really impressed with the poll to see how many first-time participants we have. Just as a matter of background, Tom Cullen, I'm the administrator of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Office of Spill Prevention and Response. So I'm the lead executive appointed by Governor Brown in 2012. I lead a group of about 250 folks scattered throughout the state that protect California's precious waters, both coastal and inland, and associated wildlife and habitat from the effects of oil spills. So we have a triad of preparedness, prevention, and response programs like our other jurisdictions. So with that introduction, Chelsea, maybe we can get the slides going. I see myself, but I don't see slides. Okay, here we go. And we'll be using the word next. Here's the opening slide, one of our many COVID era responses. That's not me with my back to you. That's a convenient use of logo. But really, my background that I was going to use, next slide, was the year of COVID and video meetings. And after the third or fourth one of the day, this is kind of how my view looks, faded and glassy-eyed. But we've really come a long way, as evidenced today, with how to leverage technology. I'll talk a little bit about that more as we go. Next, please. So since the first of the year, we received 1,212 reports of oil spilled through the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. And of those reports, next slide, please, we actually sent physical responders after we triaged them. The big factor is whether it affected or could affect state waters or wildlife. And we actually sent folks to about 500 of these spills. One of the interesting things to take away from this slide, and is links directly to the work of the task force, is the yellow dots are vessels. You would think you'd see vessels along the coast. We do have those, but there are so many in the interior of the state. As a matter of fact, about 20% of our spills to water come from abandoned and derelict vessels, and that's why it's such a priority for the task force. Next slide, please. Talking about virtual presence and meetings, this is a list of the many standing meetings that I personally participate in. We have 5 harbor safety committees. The big thing that we had to really adjust to, and I know I'm speaking for other jurisdictions as well, is how to conduct drills and exercises, because COVID has kind of turned risk on its side. We learned about HAZWOPER and protecting responders and ourselves from hazardous materials, oil. And that the hot zone now in COVID is actually perhaps the incident command post. And so we've really had to adapt technology and ourselves into thinking how to respond virtually. So next slide, Chelsea. I just inserted this one real quickly to give an update. Many of you heard about our statewide expansion and how you can see the color-coded sections along the coast are our area contingency plan regions, and we're developing inland geographic response plans. That's the inland equivalent. And so we're looking at some of the higher risk areas, mainly associated with the transport of rails. So that's kind of a side note before I get into some of our more significant responses. Next slide, please. So next slide. 4 days into COVID, so the weekend following St. Patrick's Day, we had a truck roll off a highway into a river in the eastern part of Santa Barbara County. It was carrying 6,000 gallons of crude oil and spilled about 4,500 gallons of that into the water. It was a rocky, not a navigable water in any respect, so there was no federal presence, but it was 13 miles upstream of a reservoir. And again, this is early in COVID. We had no idea what the risks were. We were all kind of operating in a paradigm of fear and unease. So next slide, please. Here's a picture of the tanker truck. You can see it's ruptured there on the left-hand side of the left-hand picture. And you can see that, there was water moving, kind of a rocky stream bed and shoreline. Next slide. Here's a kind of a location where it is, and you can see the reservoir to the west there. Next slide. Aerial view, we maximize our use of drones, and particularly during COVID, very useful for taking a look and getting a aerial view of the operation. You can see some of the boom that's deployed in the vacuum trucks and so forth. Next slide. So top picture is what you normally would see for an incident command post. As I said, that's kind of the new COVID hot zone. We're not doing that. The bottom picture is what the command post really looks like. Many meetings and sub meetings and just communicating via various platforms. Microsoft Teams is the preferred for most of us. Adobe Connect, the Coast Guard uses, and it's great for situational unit, segmenting the screen in many partitions. Next slide. And then just some more pictures of the cleanup effort and the protective measures, the social distancing that was employed. Next slide. 12 turtles recovered, little tiny guys. One kingfisher unfortunately lost his life, but really fortunately not much of a wildlife impact, so we didn't have to send as many wildlife responders, fortunately. Next slide. Cleaned up turtles being returned. Next slide. Okay, second major incident I want to talk about is the Bonham Richard fire that happened in San Diego back in July. This was a massive casualty. It was in a dockyard availability. Fire broke out, and the fire burned out of control for about 3 days. We actually had about a million gallons of firefighting fluid and aqueous foam that was pumped into the ship, and the keel was in risk of failing. The ship was hogging, meaning that it was starting to settle and bend at the bow and stern, and there was 900,000 gallons of diesel deep in the ship in tanks, and that could have been a major incident. Next slide shows some graphics. This was a real concern to us because we learned that we really need to do a better job of reaching out and working with the Navy. The Navy is really great at doing what the Navy needs to do, but they need to realize that there were threats to the environment, and we need to let them know that we can operate in parallel with their firefighting efforts, and so that's just one of the challenges we have looking forward. Fortunately, no oil was released to the water, but it was a good eye opener for all of us. Next slide, please. I'm going to run through very quickly a list of some of the ongoing projects and priorities that we have at OSPAR. We haven't had an increase to our main source of funding, our per barrel fee of 6.5 cents per barrel that arrives at California's refinery since 2012. So we're going to be looking at a structural deficit coming up into the next calendar year. And so there's been an ongoing decline in use of petroleum, of course, with electric vehicles and other renewable sources of energy. COVID has accelerated that decrease in dependency on oil. And also with the state, we're looking at furloughs. We have 2 furlough days a month, and that results in savings to the state, but a decrease in our ability to operate. So we're going to be looking for a modest increase to our operating budget. Renewable fuels is a big issue because we at California don't have, unlike the federal government with Open 90, oversight of non-petroleum fuels. And two of California's biggest refineries, Marathon and Phillips 66 up here in the Bay Area, are already converting over to 100% production of renewables, and all of our refineries, in fact, are handling renewables to some degree. So this is something that we're also going to be looking at as we go to the legislature and in this next session to try to expand our regulatory authority. Various regulations that we're working on. I'll be happy to host questions later on to give an update. We're getting close to promulgating regulations for our spill management team oversight. We're in final rulemaking. We've had public comment, and we hope that either April or July of next year we'll have those on the street. Also developing regulations for non-floating oils per legislation that was passed last year, and also, like our per barrel fee, looking at a modest increase to the fee that we assess to non-tank vessels that come into California, the container ships, cruise ships, bulkers, and so forth. Another piece of legislation that was just passed this past session, governor signed in October, was a oil spill criminal penalties act, and it increases criminal penalties. I'm going to read a couple of the highlights from this. This came from a assembly member down in Santa Barbara County, and so we're kind of getting our head around what that's going to entail. But basically, it doubles criminal penalties from $10,000 to $1 million for a spill, and other violations such as failure to clean up following directives and so forth. It doubles criminal penalties from between $5,000 to $500,000 for other violations, failure to report, not having a oil spill contingency plan, so forth. One of the big things that is of concern, and we're going to be, again, getting our heads around, is it also creates an additional fine of up to $1,000 per gallon for spills in excess of 1,000 gallons. So, keep your ear to the wind. You'll be hearing more about that as we develop that. Next slide, please. You're going to hear a lot more about abandoned derelict vessels. Again, about 20% of our spills result from this. I'm going to cycle through some pictures, just to show how it's a huge problem here in California. Next slide. Particularly up here in the Northern California, the Sacramento and San Joaquin River deltas. This is a composite of several overflights that we did about 3 years ago that kind of mapped and assessed the various condition of these vessels that are out there. Next slide. Of course, the larger non-recreational, formerly commercial vessels, in this case a crane barge, when they do sink or capsize, they can result in millions of dollars, particularly from the Federal Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund, to remediate. So next slide. Here's right here, beautiful San Francisco. Next slide. Thanks, Chelsea. All too common sight here. Next slide. Even some beautiful, this is a training ship down in Southern California that sank overnight, and resulting in a modest release. And next slide. And they happen all the time. I pulled these two slides and the next two. Next slide. Just from the that I guess we'll stay there. Thank you. From a recent Facebook posting from this past week. A couple more, and many of these are liveaboards. If you look at the left picture, you can see there's a little motorhome that's parked right there. So it's not like we can go in and just immediately start removing. We have to take other things into consideration. And then next slide. Save the date. We hold with Chevron an annual oil spill response workshop. It's going to be virtual this year, this coming February. So you can find more about this on our website and register, and hope to see you there. And next slide. Again, what our website looks like, with all sorts of information, with regulations, cases, our jurisdictions, harbor safety committees, our calendar, drills and exercises, and so forth. Next slide. Okay, I can take a breath now. Hopefully I got through in my allotted time. I do want to add, I'd be remiss if I didn't, My thanks to my colleagues in the executive committee, particularly all those folks of the coordinating committee for the task force. They do the yeoman's share of the work, along with Sarah Hillary and Marie Roethlisberger at Veda Environmental. And again, my thanks also to Caleb and Chelsea for your support. My team at OSPR, couldn't do it without you. I'm so proud to work for all of you and the great work that you do every day. And then all of you for joining us today. So that's it. Thank you.
Great. Tom, can you hear me okay?
I can.
This is Sarah. Great. We have a couple questions in the Q&A and we do have time. So I'm going to run through a couple questions. First one is has a couple parts to it. Where can we get more details on the Santa Barbara spill response? How long did it take? Oops, it just, sorry. How long did it take to contain? Disappointing to see the lack of new containment technology being used. Would like to learn more. I see that Ryan has already put some links into that response, but just wanted to give you a chance to air the response. As well.
Ryan, the Robin to my Batman, my coordinating committee representative. Well, I would perhaps take a little bit of issue with our use of technologies. We actually had that spill contained and cleaned up within 2 weeks. It didn't go any further down toward that reservoir than about 1.5 miles from the spill site. Ryan, you did provide the links, and whoever asked the questions more than welcome to reach out to me, either through the chat, or I don't think we have an update on our website yet. We usually do put lessons learned and results of spills on there, as particularly major spills. And so, please reach out, and I'll be happy to answer any specific questions you might have.
Great. Here's one more for you, Tom. Is there any movement in California Assembly on the CADV initiative to obtain funding?
On the CADV?
I imagine that's the California ADV initiative.
The derelict vessel.
CADV.
Yeah, we
commercial ADV.
The commercial, right? So somebody's very astute. They recognize that California does have a program managed through the Department of Parks, Boating and Waterways, for recreational vessels, but that of course doesn't apply to a lot of these former tugs and barges and perhaps old Coast Guard buoy tenders. And so we are working with a broad interagency task force work group, I should say, including many of the NGOs, the keepers, and so forth. We're hoping we can make some headway in the next session. We have a couple members in the Assembly. We have a very interested U.S. congressman who can perhaps supply some influence, and I would love to plagiarize, with deepest respect, Washington's landmark bill that they passed a couple of years ago, and perhaps build upon that, to look at registry inspections, secondary liability, and of course funding for this.
Great, thank you. Well, that's it, Tom. That's all the time we have. There are a few more questions in the Q&A that you and your staff can hopefully respond to throughout the day today. But with that, thank you so much.
I'll say this, Sarah, that one of the things with Zoom is, of course, folks, you can probably look and see that you can send notes privately one-on-one. So if you have any specific questions for me, I'll be watching the chat throughout the day.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thank you so much, Tom. Now I'd like to invite Keith Kawaoka to join me on the screen. Keith is the Deputy Director of the Hawaii Department of Health. Thank you, Keith, and it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Great presentation, Tom. My name is Keith Kawaoka. I'm the Deputy Director for Environmental Health within the Department of Health. Been on this position for a little over 5 years. Prior to that, I was the Program Manager of the Primary Response Agency, the Hazard Evaluation Emergency Response Office. So good morning, everybody, and aloha. Before I give my presentation, I just want to acknowledge on the behalf of the Department of Health that Hawaii is an indigenous space. Those people are today identified as Native Hawaiians. The Aina which we gather is located in the Apuapua of Waipio, in the Moku of Ewa, and the Molopini of Oahu. And the Paeana is Hawaii. Before I leave the slide, obviously this photo was taken probably last year. It's not, the beaches aren't as crowded as it was today. We have opened up the air traffic early last month, and like everybody else, and there'll probably be a common theme today about the effects of COVID-19. So with that, next slide. I've been putting up these slides, and for those who have come several times, have seen it, but for those who are new, and it's a good acknowledgement of the Hawaii chain of islands. Besides the main islands, which you always hear about, Hawaii, Maui, Kaho'olawe, Lanai, Molokai, Oahu, Kauai, Niihau, the archipelago of Hawaii extends some 1,500 miles from the southernmost tip of the Big Island. On the lower right, you see there, going all the way to Curie Atoll. And Midway Atoll is not included as an island. Next slide. This slide kind of shows, yes, we are dots on the map in the big Pacific Ocean, but I just want to highlight that all the islands west of Niihau, which you kind of barely make out on the top of the screen on the ocean, you make out Hawaii in the lower left, lower right of that top blurb there. Most of the islands are unpopulated and incorporated into the Papahanao Mokua Kea National Monument since 2006. It is listed as a U.S. National Monument as one of the largest protected marine conservation areas in the world. So I just want to give you that perspective that although we're just in the middle of the Pacific and compared to the rest of the British Columbia and the States, we do have a sizable marine environment to deal with. Next slide, please. I just want to give you a quick authority and laws we are based on. One is the Environmental Response Law, HRS 128D. Basically, it's our reason for responding to any oil or chemical spills. Also deals with the remediation of sites throughout the states. And same with the contingency plan. Contingency plan, HRR, Hawaii Administrative Revised Statutes 11-451 is the methodology that we follow, I'm sure with all the other jurisdictions. Our primary source of funding for responding to spills is the Environmental Response Revolving Fund, which is basically a barrel tax, 5 cents barrel tax on imported crude oil, and civil penalties from enforcement. Through the years, the funding has gone down, and I'll go into it more in the presentation, but because it's dependent on petroleum, we've seen a decrease throughout the years of the fund. Next slide. For us, and I'm sure other presenters will discuss oil movement, but for us, largely because of COVID-19 and a decrease in air travel, cruise ships, tourism in general, and the fact that most of the population is teleworking, we've seen a decrease in the oil demand, certainly in terms of refinery processing, and certainly in a drop of aviation fuel consumption. We've seen almost over an 85% decrease from August this year to from August last year on aviation fuel consumption. And that's primarily because we basically shut down air traffic for the better part of a year. Next slide, please. I want to go through some of the incidents and ongoing activities that we have in Hawaii. Fortunately, I think Hawaii, we've been fortunate during the COVID-19 period that we have not seen a great many incidents. I just want to go over some of them. Some have occurred within the last year, but some have been ongoing multi-years. Next slide, please. The first one is the Matson heavy fuel oil spill for November of last year in Honolulu Harbor. About less than 10 barrels were released during the bunkering operations. And it was largely due to operator error involving during the fueling operations. Oil got out from the pre-boom containment and coated the surrounding area of the harbor, including the pier pilings, bumpers, seawalls, riprap, and even Coast Guard cutters. I'd like to point out that we're probably the first of the jurisdiction to have a shark spotter. Actually, it's a 10 to 12 foot tiger shark that was observed in the area about a month ago. At least that's what my staff says. Next slide, please. One of the effects of, at least in Hawaii, I'm sure other jurisdictions, is that whenever there's any kind of a petroleum spill into the waters, and I think if you recall several years ago, we had a molasses spill in the harbor. One of the main effects, not just the marine life, but certainly in terms of the coral populations in the surrounding area. So what you see, you can make out on the left, a coral reef nursery that's composed of individual fragments exposed to basically optimal conditions, light, water, nutrient conditions, before it's aggregated and then created at least to make a viable colony. On the right, you see various species found in the Hawaiian waters. The overall goal is to get healthy coral into the ocean that have been damaged or has to be replaced as soon as possible, where it is needed for after experiencing significant damage to losses. The molasses spill about 5-6 years ago basically destroyed most of the coral communities in the harbor and surrounding the harbor. Next slide, please. These are some photos of the Matson debunkering incident. As I said, fuel was released from the port side of the vessel and onto the pier's apron and tire bumpers. The fuel then flowed into the water outside of the pre-containment boom, which ran along the vessel. The gap between the vessel and the pier side that the tire bumpers create provided a path for the oil to flow outside of the containment. Next slide, please. The next incident has actually been going on for multiple years. The U.S. Navy Defense Logistics Agency owns this fuel storage, underground fuel storage facility. And if you look on the left photo, you'll see an artist's rendition of 20 underground tanks built into a ridge, and it was built just prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And if you count them, trust me, there are 20 of these tanks, each holding 12.5 million gallons of fuel. Each tank is equivalent to about a 20-story building. It's hard to fathom the size of this facility, but nonetheless, it's one of the the nation's civil engineering accomplishments. But like I said, this facility was started construction during, before the Pearl Harbor bombing and ended about 3 years later. And the only time they stopped construction was during the attack of Pearl Harbor. But in December of 2013, one of the tanks, Tank 5, was placed into service after having a multi-year, 3-year maintenance schedule program. The tank was being filled to the capacity when sensors detected a drop in the fuel level and released about 27,000 gallons of jet fuel. The release was subsurface, and to this date, we have not identified where that fuel has gone to. But it generated, in 2015, just when I started getting on board, an administrative order of consent between Hawaii DOH, EPA, the US Navy, and the Defense Logistics Agency. So it's a very comprehensive AOC. We are working on it. It's probably one of the largest projects we're working on today. Next slide, please. This photo shows at the base of Tank 5, the dark color you see in the wall is evidence that the fuel did leak out from the tanks. And just to remind you, the tanks were carved out of the native bedrock there, and there is just one steel lining that was put in place to hold the various tank fuel products. To date, the Navy generated what we call what option they're going to select, at least for the first set of tanks, to upgrade the tanks. And the options range from a single wall options to a double wall option, epoxy coating, and there are about 2 or 3 other options that they presented. The recommendation for the first set of the tank upgrade alternatives was a single wall option. EPA and DOH reviewed that recommendation, and we felt that there are a lot of deficiencies in there to support the recommendation. So we told the Navy and DLA to come up with additional information that either to go to an alternative solution or provide more information on their recommended option. Next slide, please.
You have about 30 more seconds there, Keith. Thank you.
Okay. The third option, and I presented for, is the area dispersant delivery system. It's been in place for quite a while. As you can see, the people there have been involved early on. But we did an exercise recently on the dispersant capability. We put in a fluorescent dye into the ocean to simulate an oil spill. And the dye could be seen, as, next slide, please, for miles as a prospective oil plume would take. Next slide, please. So we implemented all the dispersant capability. The Coast Guard did a flyover. We were on the boats, as you can see, to monitor the plume. And I think it was a successful project. Next slide, please. Like Tom said, we're all going through various changes because of Program 19. We are heading into a furlough situation. We've already seen some reductions in our budgets and anticipate more in the years to come. So with that gloomy note, I'll end it there. Next slide. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Keith. Excellent presentation. We will keep going on schedule here. So there's one question for you in the Q&A, and I'll ask if you can check that out after the presentation and respond. But to keep us on schedule, we're going to jump on to the next presentation. I'd like to invite Lydia Emer now to join me on the screen. Lydia is the Administrator for Lands Quality Programs with Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. And I'll wait till I see Lydia.
Looks like
before
it's in
handing off the baton.
transition.
There you are.
I am
Great.
good. Good morning,
Excellent.
everybody. My name is Lydia Emer. I'm the Land Quality Division Administrator for the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. I'm responsible for 5 statewide programs: emergency response, environmental cleanup, materials management, hazardous waste, and tanks. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share a little of the amazing emergency response teams 2020. Next slide, please. At the beginning of 2020, movement of crude by rail within Oregon showed a substantial increase of about 25% from the previous year. The COVID pandemic, however, caused an equally large decrease in fuel demand, and crude shipments subsequently dropped off in the second quarter. The third quarter shows some resurgence overall, with the resumption of shipments along the Central Oregon route. Tanker vessel shipment of crude oil shows a steady increase in traffic annually. Zenith terminals expanded their ability to simultaneously process rail cars from 12 to 44. In 2018, we observed 7 tanker exports of crude oil. In 2019, there were 25. And so far in 2020, we've recorded 33, with an expected 38 to 40 by the end of the year. Overall, we're seeing an increase in transloaded tanker shipping and a decrease in out-of-state movement by rail. We haven't seen any significant shifts in the refined product movement overall. However, Columbia Pacific Biorefinery in Clatskanie is in the process of switching their business model from ethanol exports to transload renewable diesel, and DEQ has approved their oil spill response plan, allowing them to do so. Next slide, please. The Oregon legislature authorized a fee-funded high-hazard rail program in 2019. Our first hire, Kieran Gray, has been working hard to develop the associated rules with the advisory committee, all completed in a COVID virtual environment, and we're now in the public comment period. Next slide, please. 2021 will be equally busy as we move into program implementation. We're currently recruiting for the second position in preparation for the rail plans being submitted in January. We'll be requesting approval of draft rules from our Environmental Quality Commission in March. Our team of 2 will initiate rail geographic response plans in the first quarter of 2021, and it'll be interesting to see how we begin this effort in a virtual environment. Next slide, please. On December 15th, 2017, a tanker truck crashed on Highway 22 near the town of Idana, spilling over 11,000 gallons of gasoline. On February 16, 2020, another tanker crashed very close to the same location, spilling approximately 8,000 gallons of a combination of gasoline and diesel fuel. The response faced many of the same challenges experienced during the 2017 response. These challenges included the North Santiam River is the drinking source for multiple downstream municipalities. It's an active spawning area for salmonid reds. The response necessitated closure of a major transportation artery linking eastern and western Oregon. There were significant impacts to the road's subsurface, resulting in fuel release into the river for a very long period of time. It was a remote location, and all of this happened during very cold weather conditions. The team performed an endangered species emergency consultation, resulting in recommendations for best management practices, such as deploying silt curtains and hay bales and keeping vegetation removal at the bank to a minimum. Next slide, please. Over 5,000 cubic yards of soil were excavated and removed from a 500-foot-long section of the highway at the spill location. By end of day, February 21st, just 5 days after the crash occurred, excavation was completed and the highway repaved and reopened. Boom maintenance, changing of absorbents, and monitoring of residual petroleum in the ground and surface water continues. There's free product. There's free product on the groundwater in monitoring wells, but no active sheening is present in the river. While 1 dead juvenile salmonid was recorded during the response, no other impacts were observed. Next slide, please. 2017 lessons learned resulted in a markedly improved response in 2020. Unified command was instituted with DEQ, EPA, ODOT, and the trucking company. Petroleum was migrating on groundwater through the highway roadbed and was observed entering the river. Hard and absorbent booms were deployed to contain and minimize impacts to the river. A water sampling and monitoring program was implemented to ensure that downstream water users and spawning salmonids were protected. It was decided that the best way to manage the response was mass excavation of the roadbed down to the river level, removing the majority of spilled fuel in the process and reducing long-term impacts. Next slide, please. Also in February 2020, heavy rains and snowmelt combined to cause extensive flooding in eastern Oregon and other parts of the state. Next slide, please. Floodwaters scoured the river bottom and exposed the Northwest Product System, or Marathon, petroleum product pipeline at its Umatilla River crossing near Cayuse, Oregon. Historically, it's believed the pipeline was installed by a shallow trenching in the sediment. The pipeline runs from Salt Lake City to the Tri-Cities and from there to the Spokane area, including Fairchild Air Base, supplying gasoline, diesel fuel, and jet fuel. A number of water users, including the City of Pendleton's drinking water intake and Oregon Fish and Wildlife fish acclimation facilities, are located downstream of the crossing. Next slide, please. Bags of grout had been installed by the operator to stabilize the exposed 8-inch pipelines, one of which was actively transporting fuel. DEQ was originally notified of the situation on April 13th and began working with Marathon, the U.S. Department of Transportation's Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, EPA, Army Corps of Engineers, and the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation to better understand the situation. The primary concern was for waterborne debris to damage the pipeline and cause a spill. Marathon and PHMSA demonstrated that the stabilization measures exceeded engineering standards for the conditions, with the grout bags being more closely placed than strictly necessary out of undue caution. Next slide, please. Resources at risk were identified, response strategies were developed and tested, and additional response equipment was staged in the area. An increase in monitoring frequency was implemented for both remote and on-scene monitoring. The pipeline has since been replaced with directional boring methods and is now located at a depth approximately 40 feet below the river bottom. The old piping sections in between the new connection points have been vacated of product and removed. Next slide, please. 2020 has felt like a year of juggling. DEQ conducted our COVID-19 response using ICS principles, resulting in lots of lessons learned around bringing on people who are not deeply experienced in ICS. About 92% of agency staff are working remotely. Our IT colleagues deployed laptops, cell phones, MS Teams, and Zoom in an incredibly short period of time, and we're using these tools to build and sustain relationships and collaboration. We're also hiring and onboarding new staff virtually. We're learning how to safely conduct field work. The core theme of 2020, if nothing else, is safety above all else. We're also navigating racial justice with demonstrations across our state. DEQ is exploring how bias is incorporated into the way we work and how we can do things differently. Our shift to remote work has demonstrated that we are able to work in new and often better ways. I'm confident that this talented group of people will find ways to connect with and learn from underrepresented communities across our state. September saw unprecedented wildfires in Oregon, which meant diverting resources from the COVID-19 response. We had very similar lessons on rotating staff into the response and bringing them up to speed rapidly. As with our tanker and pipeline responses, we deeply value partnerships with and support from tribes, federal and state agencies, and local governments. We're now moving into the SRF-7 recovery phase, which is also brand new to our state. 2020 closes for us with program management changes. Mike Zolich will fully retire on December 31st, if you can believe that or not. Wes Risha will be our rotational program manager for emergency response until we're able to recruit for the permanent position. While we're all nervous about an emergency response program without Mike, I'm excited to welcome Wes, who has 30 years of Air National Guard experience and recently retired from the service as a lieutenant colonel. Next slide, please. I think we've all experienced a stressful 2020, to put it mildly. The year has brought unprecedented challenges and insisted that we learn to respond virtually and modify plans designed for actions conducted in person. However, it's also highlighted the incredibly talented, resourceful, and innovative period who form the teams who serve our communities during these dark times. I'm thankful to each person who shows up every day, ready to make a difference and serve our state. Thank you again for your time to share our year with you all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lydia. We do have a couple of minutes for questions. If anyone has questions for Lydia, Emer, or the Oregon DEQ program, feel free to pop them in the chat, in the Q&A. Again, we're holding the Q&A platform for just questions and answers regarding the presentations. At this point, Lydia, I don't see any questions. So I'll thank you again for an excellent presentation. And with this, at this point, we'll pivot over to Alaska. And I'd like to invite now Denise Koch to join the screen with me here. And Denise is the director of the SPAR program at Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Denise.
All right, thanks so much, Sarah. Welcome to everyone who's attending today. I know we've all gotten used to having our interactions be virtual and video conferences. And I think we're improving that every time. So really appreciate all the interaction and participation that some of these virtual formats can provide. So once again, I am Denise Koch. I work for the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. Sometimes it's referred to as DEC or ADEC. DEC has a number of different major program areas. We've got air, we've got water, we've got environmental health, and then the other area that I'm the director of is SPAR, Spill Prevention and Response. A little bit about SPAR generally. SPAR has 3 major programs within it. So we have the Prevention, Preparedness, and Response program. And that's really what I'm going to focus on today in terms of this presentation, but also be aware that SPAR is broader than just Prevention, Preparedness, and Response, which we refer to as the PPR program. That program is a major program, and it is the program manager is Graham Wood, who many of you know and others will hear from later in the conference when he's moderating a session on the VMT spill. We also have a contaminated sites program, and the contaminated sites program deals with sort of longer term legacy contamination, and oftentimes spills that PPR responds to when they get into the sort of the longer term management stage, they get handed over to contaminated sites. And then we have an administrative program as well. I do want to say that I'm calling in from Juneau, Alaska, which is the capital of Alaska, and this is traditional Tlingit land, so Ganoshish, thank you for that. So if you could advance the slide, please. So we like to include this slide in all of our presentations. It keeps the whole department sort of on the same page and highlights our values of objectivity, accountability, integrity, collaboration, and customer service. Next slide, please. All right, so perseverance in the time of COVID. I know many of these presentations are talking about COVID and how we're doing our regular work during this unprecedented time. I would say that actually, on balance, we have done pretty well. Back around March 17th, we had an all-staff meeting in SPAR, and very soon after that, almost all of the SPAR staff started working remotely. We had a few people who were in the offices. As of last week, even our governor made a plea to Alaskans in both private and public sector industries to try and have as many people work from home as possible as our COVID cases are rising. So we're obviously very conscious of COVID and trying to keep the communities that we serve safe, trying to keep our staff safe. And I think that we've done so while still delivering on our mission. So most people are at home, we've got laptops, we have responded to spills during COVID, and we've done so successfully. We've all adapted to this new format of all of our staff meetings being virtual. We have some new virtual tools for signing documents and those sorts of things. So there was some adaptation that had to happen, but I think that it's generally gone over remarkably well. So we've still done our work. We're still working on our contingency plans. We're still working on area plans. In Alaska, we've particularly been working on our inland area plan and our southeast plan, and of course, doing our response work. Next slide, please. So I wanted us to talk about, these are just some of the slides we like to present regularly to give a sense of sort of a longer term picture. And you can see in terms of the types of releases that we've had, it's remarkably stable in that the number of releases are primarily non-crude petroleum. So that's everything from home heating oil to motor oil to avgas and diesel, and just all those things that are non-crude. Our second category of the largest number of spills is the hazardous substance category, and that includes everything from PFAS to heavy metals to ammonia. So we have a number of spills in that category, and then the smallest category that you'll see at the top are the smallest number of spills we have are crude oil spills. So next slide, please. So for this slide, I want to also be clear for the last slide, the graph on the last slide, and in this slide, but I think it's more important in this slide. If you look at the x-axis, you'll see that the years that we're talking about are state of Alaska fiscal years. So when we're looking at the right side of this chart that says 2020, it is not calendar year 2020. It is Alaska state fiscal year 2020. In our fiscal years go from July 1st of every year until June 30th of the next year. So in terms of COVID and the impact of COVID on the number of exercises and inspections that we've had, you can see in fiscal year 2020, there was impact, there was a decrease, but most of the impact I think that we'll see in terms of the number of exercises and inspections with COVID, we'll see in state fiscal year 2021. Because we captured this the March through June slice of time during COVID is reflected here, but July, August, and forward are not reflected. In Alaska, we have at DEC we have tried to maintain some consistency in the department and our approach to operations during the time of COVID. So we did have a cross-divisional group that works on compliance and enforcement efforts, and they put together some procedures for how to operate in times of COVID. That is on our DEC webpage. We've got a really prominent COVID section when you go to DEC, so you'd see it there. And individually in the individual divisions, like in SPAR, we have seen that many entities have requested that their drills and exercises be delayed. We have had one or two sort of remote, small exercises, but a lot of what we've seen is delay. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the wildlife guidelines. So this was a really important work product that we contributed to. This was part of sort of the Alaska Regional Response Team, which is a partnership between DEC, SPAR, U.S. Coast Guard, and EPA. We are all part of this Alaska Regional Response Team. And these wildlife guidelines have been updated. It's a major work product. And of course, They were updated for many reasons. They integrated sort of the latest science. They aligned a little bit better with the ICS structure and had the responder as user in mind. They also are referenced in all of our area contingency plans so that there's some consistency in all the area plans across the state. But this is something that we're really proud of and we worked on with many of our partners. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk about just a couple of responses. I am not going to talk very much about the Valdez Marine Terminal spill because there will be a separate session talking about this response, but it just felt remiss to have a DEC SPAR presentation and not mention the Valdez Marine Terminal, the Sump or the water spill. So this spill happened in April. It required a fair bit of SPAR resources. We also had our public information officer who works actually in our commissioner's office was very involved in this response. Since it was happening in April, really at the very beginning of the COVID response, this was really our first big response during the time of COVID. Our state on-scene coordinator was located in Anchorage. She was fully integrated into the incident management team and the ICS structure, but she was doing that remotely. That was really the first time that we had done that for this large of an incident. And it worked really well. It was also helped because it was complemented by the fact that DEC has an office with great staff in Valdez. So that really helped to also facilitate this remote, having our state on-scene coordinator be remote. But I think it worked really, really well. This spill was a mixture of Alaska North Slope crude and water, so it was an oily water spill. In terms of the amount of crude, it was about 1,400 gallons of crude equivalent of what was actually spilled. This was an interesting response also because at that time, there weren't any cases of COVID in Valdez. So just sort of the operations and response in Alaska, there are a number of small towns and many of those small towns have limited medical facilities. So when you're doing these responses at the beginning of the pandemic, and we're just learning about its virulence and there's a high level of concern, you're also sort of balancing the response, but you're also thinking about the community needs, and sort of there was an awareness of not wanting to bring COVID into the community. So that's all I'll say about the Valdez Marine Terminal spill. There's will be a session on that later. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So April was a busy month for us here in SPAR. Also just mentioning April because it's significant in that both the Valdez Marine Terminal and this next incident I'm going to talk about, we were really ramping up in April, very, very close to the beginning of the pandemic real responses here in Alaska. So HEF stands for High Expansion Foam. And in April of this year, we received an anonymous call, essentially an anonymous tip, letting us saying that, hey, there had been some work done by contractors on behalf of U.S. Air Force Base, Eielson, and there had been some improper disposal and improper dumping of this high expansion foam in some in pits, in gravel pits in different locations. This is happening in the greater Fairbanks area for people who are not in Alaska. There were for Alaskans, some of it was in Salcha, they're different locations, but for our out-of-state colleagues, it was generally the Fairbanks greater area. There was concern because in a lot of Alaska, but in the Fairbanks greater area, people use groundwater as drinking water. So anytime there is there's concern, there's an illegal or improper dumping of materials, and we have concerns about what actually might have been dumped or what happened or what didn't happen. Our first thought goes to, of course, protecting public health and making sure that people are not drinking water that is contaminated in any way. That's sort of the first thing that we're looking to protect. So there was some sampling that was done. We did this in collaboration with our drinking water program at DEC, provided us with some technical guidance. There was sampling done at some wells. There were public wells that people drew water from. There were also a number of private drinking water wells in the area that we wanted to protect. We conducted that sampling. We were looking for everything from PFAS compounds to volatile organics to semi-volatiles. And we're happy to say that after we've done all that testing at both the public water wells and the private water wells, that the water was safe to drink. There wasn't any level of contamination that was above any criteria or threshold. So we were happy to see that, and we're still investigating. This is an ongoing investigation that we are pursuing. So next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about Shugnak. So Shugnak, this is a community in the Northwest Arctic borough. It's on the Koch River. It's a remote Alaska community. There was a spill, there was an overfill essentially from a fuel delivery. There was a spill of about 15,000 gallons. This is another instance where our state on scene coordinator was based in Anchorage and this spill happened during COVID. He was the SOSC remotely. That was very effective. We, unlike say the Valdez Marine Terminal incident, which happened in a location where we had staff in that community, we don't have staff in Shugnak. We did send somebody out to Shugnak to do some sort of a little bit of field work out there, but that was, we did that when we were mindful of, once again, it's this balance of responding to the spill, but trying to send as few people and to be in a community for as short a period as possible as is needed to do the job, but also to not bring risk to the community or to the responder. And luckily in this, for this heating oil release, a lot of the concern had been about, there had been concern about the spill reaching the Koch River, and it did not appear that that was the case. There was no sheening on the river. There was a lot of contaminated soil, but we were pleased that it didn't reach the river. So next slide, please. Another item I wanted to mention that we've been busy working on is there was a vessel traffic risk analysis that was done for Southeast Alaska, and this was really done to try to understand how much oil is transported through the Southeast region, the types of traffic that we're seeing, and also to identify both high-risk activities and higher risk sort of areas and vessels and those sorts of things. So this was really helpful, especially as we've been also working, I mentioned, on our area contingency plan for the Southeast area. So this was a valuable tool. Next slide, please. So I'm switching gears completely here, but this is very, very important. Much of this presentation has been about operations during the time of COVID, and that was certainly a theme that we wanted to touch on in this conference, because COVID, of course, casts a very long shadow over all of our work, whether you're in the spill prevention and response world or any line of work that you're in. So it's certainly a relevant topic to talk about. But I wanted to also mention that's not the only issue that casts a long shadow over the program. Here at SPAR, we have some really, really significant budget challenges that cast, I would argue, an even larger shadow over sort of our programs than even COVID. In terms of the budget can get really, really complicated. So for people who were on, who are joining us today, who were very savvy about the budget, I apologize. I'm going to really zoom out to the 100,000 foot level. But I just want to, oh, yes?
Sorry, this is Sarah. You have about 30 seconds left.
Okay. So the big picture was perfect. I just want to give the big picture, 100,000 foot level, is that although in SPAR, our spending has remained flat, our revenue has had a very significant long-term decline. So we have this gap between what we're spending and what we're bringing in. And that is going to cause, if there is no change in terms of spending and there's no new revenue and all of our projections hold steady, we are projected to run out of money in our prevention account, which funds our day-to-day operations, in about 4 fiscal years. And that could result in as many as 30 positions that we'd have to eliminate. And the whole program in SPAR, which includes PPR and CS and our admin group, is 128 people. So that just gives a sense of this is a really significant issue and something I spend a lot of my time on. But I'll end there. I know that's a little bit of a downer, but I do want to just at least very quickly thank the whole SPAR division, and in particular PPR and the folks who worked on this presentation. We've got a really great team and everyone's worked really hard to adapt during these unique times.
Great, thank you, Denise. Excellent presentation. And we do have time for one question. I see one that's popped in. Any idea of the responsible party for that dumped the HEF?
Yeah, so we are in the process of doing an investigation. So I'm not trying to be obtuse. It's just that when we're doing an investigation, we have to be a little bit obtuse. Once we complete our investigation, we'll be able to sort of share everything. But we do have some ideas about who could have dumped that HEF. We also just want to say we have a lot of information. We have what we call sit reps that are posted on our website. I can later on put something in the chat. I'll give you a link to that sit rep. There are about, I think we had 5 different documents about the HEF dumping. So there's a lot of information in there, but we haven't reached any conclusions yet, and we haven't concluded our investigations or compliance and enforcement.
Great, thank you. And there's one more and quick question, I think. Was the U.S. Coast Guard involved in the risk assessment study?
Oh, in the Southeast vessel traffic study. I believe that a lot of that work was done by a contractor, but of course we always partner with the U.S. Coast Guard because this work informs the Southeast area contingency plans, and those contingency plans are done in a collaborative manner and with our other Alaska RRT partners like EPA and the U.S. Coast Guard. So we have partners that are involved, but I believe that the bulk of that work was done by a contractor.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Denise. Appreciate your time and wonderful presentation. I'll now invite Laurel Nash to join me on the screen. And Laurel is the Assistant Deputy Ministry of the BC Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. Laurel, it's all yours. Wait till I see you pop up on the screen before I disappear myself. There we go.
See me now?
We see you, we hear you.
And it's
You're good.
the top of my head, I can't see myself. So, oh, there we are. Good morning, everyone. I'm Laurel Nash, as Sarah has mentioned. I'm very pleased to be here today to provide the update from BC. And I am speaking to you today from Victoria, British Columbia on Vancouver Island, which is the beautiful territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, and those are the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Wasonic First Nations. And I'm really pleased to be here to share what has been happening in British Columbia over the last year. I want to acknowledge the task force members, the presenters, and all the participants. Very lovely to see how many new participants there are. This is such an important discussion, and this is my second time at the annual meeting. The last time was in person, and though that was amazing getting to meet so many people in person, I think this opportunity to expand and do this virtually really does open up participation. And as a ministry, so the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, our division in particular does environmental protection, and emergency management is one component of it, as was land remediation. And we have been working virtually for quite a few years, though not full time. And we started working full time in March from home, and over the last few months have started to come back into the office part-time. Some parts of our province right now, particularly in the Metro Vancouver area, Lower Mainland, are seeing quite significant increases in COVID-19. So in that area in particular, that region, we've been asking people to work from home as much as possible. And as a ministry and the provincial government, we are continuing to work at least part-time from home, and will continue to be nimble depending on how things progress. And we've been very fortunate until very recently that we've had very low numbers, and it has really allowed us to continue to improve how we can work virtually in this very challenging time. So next slide, please. So our environmental emergency program, it carries out a wide range of activities, including preparing for and responding to spills and hazardous materials, assessing and overseeing spill responses, providing scientific advice and site support in an incident, overseeing and regulating environmental recovery following a spill. As I've mentioned, we do have a land remediation group, working with partner agencies to effectively coordinate the roles and responsibilities, and developing regulations, policies, procedures, plans, operational guidelines, cooperative agreements, and technical documents to ensure the effective coordinated action in an emergency. So we work within 3 pillars. One is preparedness, and it's primarily composed of office staff located in Victoria here and on Vancouver Island. Response, and we have 19 response officers strategically distributed throughout the province. And then recovery, and that's a group of scientists located in Victoria, and they will deploy out to the spill sites as needed. Next slide, please. So a summary of events in British Columbia. And like Alaska, we work on a fiscal year report out of events. And unlike Alaska, though, our fiscal year is April 1st to March 31st. So this report out is April 1st, 2019 to March 30th, 2020. And highlights of this are we had 4,635 reports of spills or other environmental emergencies. 31 incidents were considered high risk. And in general, we do have a field response in those situations. Nearly 2/3 of the majority events were located in our northern part of our province, in northern BC, and that's in the pink or purple area that you can see on the slide. Flammable liquids such as gasoline, diesel, and heating fuel were the most common substances spilled. They were 1,973. And equipment failure, such as ruptured equipment lines, that was the most common cause, 46% of that total. And also like to mention that there were also a large number of spills that could not have been attributed to a source, so 24% that were undefined. And then the commercial sector was responsible for the most number of spills, 973. And that's likely due to the fact that the sector is the largest user of petroleum products in the province. Next slide, please. So we've all been talking about COVID-19 and how that is affecting our ability to plan and respond. We have modified our business practices by applying the BC Centre for Disease Control protective measures and the Public Service Agency guidance to the office environments and field responses. So our Department of Operations Centre was activated to support the province's response to COVID-19 and to maintain business continuity within the program. So that occurred very early on during the pandemic. So early in March and April, that was stood up. Industry and agencies established their respective COVID-19 safety protocols, and we continued to monitor environmental emergencies or high-risk sites virtually when on-site attendance was not possible due to travel restrictions. And so I think we're hearing that as a common theme. People have been adapting and modifying our approaches as much as possible to reduce people having to get out there on the ground if there isn't a critical need to do that. We continue to coordinate with response contractors and waste management facilities across the province and to continually assess their capability and capacity to respond to the emergencies. On-site, these are 4 key areas our team is focused on to ensure an effective and safe response. Safety protocols, so I think all of the states have highlighted, they've put in safety protocols. Ours must exceed each of the incident command post agency representative protocols. Our responders must be safe and comfortable in entering an ICP, incident command post. And for example, I'll go into the Trans Mountain Pump Station, but we did COVID screening questionnaires, we signed in, we provided masks and set protocols for masks if working within 2 meters of the spill site and encourage social distancing. So just above and beyond what was required necessarily at that time. The second pillar here is anticipate and plan around barriers. And so looking at maximum room occupancy, we saw an earlier presentation where we've moved from everybody being in one space to actually being virtual. And I would suggest that we've moved very nimbly into that space because we had been already in many contexts working virtually. And communication, and I think this is one of the key pieces for all of the work that we're doing around emergency response is being nimble and able to work in a mix of in-person and virtual team meetings. Document management has to be effective and actually online so people can use that in different locations. And we need to make sure, and we've been doing this throughout the process, that we have the right tools, applications, technology, and connectivity to support communications. And so, as we all appreciate, often these events happen in remote areas. And so connectivity could be challenging in that space as well. So we're working and moving. The provincial government is committed to, again, increasing connectivity to remote communities. And that will support our work as well. We have been really focused on clear communication and language in external communications. And so For example, working with our Indigenous partners, local governments, other partners, ensuring that everyone is really clear. We're not using too many acronyms, all of those types of things to really ensure that we're moving quickly and people understand what's required. And then the fourth pillar here is resource availability. And staff of the responsible person, other agencies and First Nations have varying levels of availability to participate because of COVID-19. In our Indigenous communities, we have the vast majority of them have been closed to access and may also have some challenges with connectivity. And so we're having to find ways to ensure that we're able to communicate and engage, as an example. But fortunately, our response contractors have been operating at full capacity throughout the pandemic, so we've been leaning in on them. An example, again, I'll go into a little bit more detail about this, but we did experience some challenges with the Sumas spill because of reduced hours of operations at waste management facility. Hotels were partially closed and conference facilities were closed where we were needing to actually bring people together. So again, we've been trying to work through those challenges to ensure that things are going as seamless as possible. Next slide. So good segue into the crude oil spill at Sumas Pump Station. That occurred on June 12th, about 11:20 p.m. And that was at the Trans Mountain Sumas Pump Station, very close to the community of Abbotsford in the lower mainland and the lower part of the province. Approximately 150,000 to 190,000 liters of oil were released within the pump station. It was in the territory of the Sumas, Stolo, Matsqui, and Laquemal First Nations, and so they were informed and invited to attend at the site. Unified command was established by Trans Mountain and the CER to manage the emergency phase of this incident. Sampling results from groundwater wells indicate oil had reached the groundwater table. However, all impacts were within the Trans Mountain property, fortunately. Contaminated soil was excavated and removed from the site, and Trans Mountain is continuing to transition to the remediation phase of the project. Our role as the Ministry of Environment was during the emergency phase of the incident to attend the site, monitor restoration efforts, and provide inputs on Trans Mountain's environmental management plan. We'll take part in the review and comment on the long-term remedial action plan to ensure provincial, community, and Indigenous interests continue to be a priority, and our staff will continue to monitor groundwater results as they become available. I think one of the other key aspects of this is our team ensured that reach out to our Indigenous partners happened immediately after we were made aware of the incident, and continue to ensure and encourage our federal and Trans Mountain representatives to ensure that they were actively engaged and participating in the event. A remedial action plan, just so you're aware, is a document that describes how the cleanup of a contaminated site will occur. It may also address reclamation, which is the site restoration, such that it is returned to as close to the original state as it was prior to the spill. And so that information is set out in the Canada Energy Regulators Remediation Process Guide for those that are interested in that. Next slide, please. We also had another significant incident at Williams Lake, and that's in the northern center part of the province. And this incident happened right as we were really trying to figure out how we continue to work in a virtual world with COVID-19. So it began in April 2020. The city of Williams Lake experienced severe flooding and erosion that had a very significant impact on their sewage treatment plant, discharge pipe and access roads, and bridges. So there were quite a few bridges that were taken out, as well as the road and significant infrastructure. It's located upstream from the Fraser River, which many of you may know is a very significant salmon river. So that caused some additional concern. Due to the warm temperatures and low flood conditions, the dilution of the effluent was a major issue. And it caused, the damage caused temporary release of partially treated and untreated sewage to the Williams Lake Creek. Approximately 8 kilometers of pipe needed to be repaired, but the efforts were slowed by landslides and the cold temperatures. The pipe repairs are anticipated to be completed sometime this month. And we still don't know the total volume of partially treated or untreated sewage that was released into the environment and that river system. So we provided on-site assessments and guidance as a ministry and sampling requirements. The Department Operations Center was activated to support on-site operations. And we were instrumental in bringing in our Williams Lake First Nation to participate in this operations center. One of the things that we continue to work on with our Indigenous partners throughout this province is to ensure that they are actively engaged in any of our responses to ensure they, excuse me. Sorry about that. Basically to ensure as the rights holders and our government to government relationship with our Indigenous people, that they can work with us on any potential impacts on traditional activities, salmon, archaeological sites. And so this was a real opportunity for us to work with them, bring them in with the city of Williams Lake as the responsible party to look to find opportunities for resolution here. One of the outcomes of this was that tripartite memorandum of understanding was developed with the city of Williams Lake, the nation, as well as the province that would really help to guide how we work collaboratively on the sampling and monitoring to assess impacts of that spill. Next slide. Wanted to give you an update on the integrated incident management system. We are implementing a new web-based system, and it's been challenging, and I think anyone that's in the process or has done that in the past recognizes that those systems can be quite challenging. We've been working on it for several years, and through the process of acquiring a new incident information management system, I just, number one, would like to thank those that have been involved. We've really benefited from our colleagues in Washington State that have helped us with identifying specifications and providing demonstrations of how your systems work. And we have landed on Web EOC as our system that we're working on. I will let you know, as we can all appreciate, these things take some time. Our team's been working hard to get to the implementation phase, and we're now planning to go live next Monday on the 23rd. Emergency Management BC's Emergency Coordination Center, which manages the provincial spills line, will be directly inputting information into our Web EOC for our environmental emergency response officers so that they will actually get real-time information and can action that. And then I think the other point on this, without doing a deep dive, is that for the task force, that the data is now being inputted into, the data that's being inputted into the web EOC does align with the Oil Spills Task Force Data Dictionary. So we'll be able to more effectively supply data for the OSTF annual report. So the diagram that you're seeing depicts spill location and initial reports details on the map view within the system. So I think it's really an important tool that will allow us to continue to collaborate better, not only within the province with Emergency Management BC, but also with our colleagues in Washington State. Next slide, please.
Laurel, you have about 30 more seconds. Thank
you. So maybe I'll just quickly then, because I've got a couple of more slides. So on the safety and training, I just want to highlight that we've been doing training with our federal colleagues, the Western Canada Maritime Response Corporation. We've been actively engaging with Indigenous nations and trying to find those opportunities to train together to have the most people trained for these responses. We're coming to the end of a 2.5-year project to modernize our training program, and we've had over 650 hours of technical and safety training for our response officers. We're continuing to do online and in-house training during COVID. So we're trying to keep up to date on all of that. Next slide. I think, like everyone else, we're just continuing to update our Work Safe BC practices during this COVID-19 to ensure that everyone is operating and in as safe a place as possible, considering the very challenging work that our front line emergency response team has. Next slide. I also just wanted to highlight that we have new legislation in British Columbia that we have been implementing the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. I won't go into great detail. I encourage you to, if you're not familiar with this, to have a look at the legislation. We are actively working to be more engaged, co-designing, working together with our Indigenous partners throughout British Columbia. And in particular, the focus of this, of course, is around emergency response and spill response, so finding those opportunities as we go forward. And then finally, I just wanted, the last slide is the thank you, and I just wanted to do a big shout out, number one, to the task force and our colleagues, and the continued collaboration that we have with our federal partners as well as our state partners on initiatives. I also want to thank Sarah and Hillary in particular for organizing this, and the team that's been supporting us technically, and to my team, to Kelly Krasnowski and Sarah Basic in particular. Thank you very much for all the work that you do. And finally, for those of you that may know our Director of Emergencies, Peter Brock, he is now taking on a role with Emergency Management BC. So I wanted to congratulate him and welcome Rod Allen into that role for us. So we have a seamless transition, and I know our collaboration with Emergency Management BC will be even further enhanced. So thank you, and I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you, Laurel, and wonderful presentation. We are going to move right into our next and final jurisdictional update. I would like to invite Dale Jensen, Spills Manager of the Spill Program Manager at Washington Department of Ecology. Dale, we would love to see you up there on the screen. There you are. Excellent. And with that, I'll hand you the baton.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. You can hear me? I assume. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yes. It's great to be the closer here, and it's always so much fun to hear the jurisdictional updates. As Sarah said, I'm Dale Jensen. I manage the oil spill program here in the state of Washington. We have statewide responsibility for oil spill prevention, preparedness, and response. Our prevention and preparedness work is focused on large volumes of oil. So we work very closely with companies that move oil by rail, by pipeline, by vessel, and then the oil handling facilities on the shoreline. So that's our big focus. But we also have all hazards responsibility too. So we respond to about 4,000 reported spills a year. In-person response to about 30% of those. So we have, mostly oil, mostly small oil spills so far. Thanks for that these last few years. And we also do drug labs and other hazmat responses. So lots of good work. We're operating, as others have shared, in a COVID environment. I think very successfully. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we're also operating at about a 16% vacancy rate too, because we have a hiring freeze in place. So it's been very careful in our ability to rehire folks. So I'm really proud of my team and what they're doing in this environment. But I also want to thank all of you for being here as part of this annual task force meeting today. It's just such a pleasure to be here with my task force partners. As I said earlier, I learned so much from them. Really appreciate Sarah Brace and Hillary Wilkinson as our executive director and coordinator for the task force. And I really do want to give a special shout out to my team of coordinating members, Linda Poke-Jarvis and Nee Irwin, and my appreciation also to Western Washington University, Chelsea and Caleb. So Chelsea will be helping me here in a minute. I'd also just like to take a moment before I get started to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from where I'm physically located today, here in Lacey, Washington, the traditional land of the Nisqually people, past and present. I'm grateful to be speaking to you all today, and I honor with gratitude the land and the Nisqually tribe. So I always look forward to these annual meetings. It's very strange in this virtual environment, but it's truly been a pleasure to learn and grow with you all through our task force work, other related oil spill prevention, preparedness planning, and response work over the past year and prior. I'm just so thankful for our shared focus on safe oil movement and the protection of our precious environmental and cultural resources and our economy. Next slide, please. This is probably something that most of you are familiar with. This is a snapshot of our state, and it shows the oil transport. We move about 20 billion gallons of oil in and through our state every year. Different modes of transportation with our emphasis on by ship, by railroad, by pipeline, and by truck. Next slide, please. This is our total oil movement volume. We track the three modes of transport pretty closely. And so you can see that we have had a decrease over the years in our dependency on oil coming into our state by vessel and a gradual increase on our pipeline capacity. And then with crude by rail in 2012, as others have mentioned in my partner states, there's been a change in the amount of volume that's coming in. So decrease on the vessel side, but we're seeing increases on other modes of transport. Next slide, please. This is a chart that shows the recent legislation our program has been implementing. And as you can see, we've been really quite busy in recent years, but we've been on a steady path to strengthen our oil transportation safety in Washington for many years. The work of our partners in the regulated community, the environmental community, tribes, and legislative members is evident in the progress we've made. So I'll go over some of the details of some of that legislatively directed work. Next slide, please. In 2018, the Washington State Legislature passed the Strengthening Oil Transportation Safety Act. The act directed Ecology to provide an activity and funding report to the legislature. That report was submitted and published earlier this year. It comprehensively outlines the spills program's activities, funding sources, funding challenges, and recommendations for future funding. The report shows that funding for the spills program has historically been unsustainable, with many new policy direction and short-term funding fixes for a long time for ongoing program work. So during this last 2020 legislative session, we were super excited about the outcome of our budget requests this year, because it put us in a place where we had more funding certainty for future biennia. And then COVID has hit, and pending any new policy direction that might come in the meantime, it's something that we'll probably continue to face. But for now, it's really quite interesting compared to what other jurisdictions have talked about, because we're a major refining state, and our revenue has been down a little bit, but actually revenue projections are fairly strong from the sources that fund our program for now anyway. Next slide. Historically, our program's focus has been on oil spilled to or threatening waters of the state, with a focus on a rapid, aggressive, and well-coordinated response to minimize impacts of a spill. However, oil spill technology focused on oil recovery from the water surface, near shore or onshore recovery and restoration. 2018 legislation gave us authority and direction to address oils in situations where they might submerge or sink. In January of 2019, Ecology initiated our rulemaking to update our oil spill contingency plan standards for tank and non-tank vessels, facilities, pipelines, and railroads to account for oils that may submerge or sink in water. So those updated rules require industry to identify the oil with a potential to sink and indicate how they will detect it and recover it. So it also requires trained personnel and equipment for the unique response challenges of non-floating oils. Traditional spill response equipment like boom or skimmers are not effective on non-floating oils. So additionally, we've enhanced the oil spill drill program standards to include situations where oil may submerge or sink. We also developed a story map that shows the resources at risk from non-floating oils in Western Washington and can be seen on our Ecology Spills webpage. There are hundreds of resources of high and moderate risk impacts from oils that submerge or sink in Washington. A very large number are located along the Columbia River. As geographic response plans are updated to consider non-floating oils, we update our resources at risk map with the latest information. So take a look at that if you're interested. Next slide, please. As a reminder, in our state, we currently require transfers of oil over water to be reported in our advanced notice of transfer IT system. This information is confidential. It informs our work at Ecology and also available to state, local, tribal first responders to inform safety practices in the event of a spill. Ecology also provides aggregated quarterly information available to the public. So again, you can see that on our webpage and see that information. New rules that we're working on now will require vessels over water oil transfer advanced notice reporting to include information on the type of crude oil, the gravity of oil, and the region per the bill of lading. Rules will require pipeline and rail oil transfer reporting requirements to include additional information concerning the type of oil for both facilities that receive crude by rail and pipelines transporting crude oil, and the gravity of oil for pipelines. And the rules will also require new information concerning the type of vapor pressure of crude oil received by facilities from a rail tank car. We filed our CR 102. We expect to adopt those rules in January of 2021. And initially, the rulemaking was scoped to address statutory limits on vapor pressure of crude oil that can be loaded or unloaded into or from a rail tank car by facilities. That's a mouthful. However, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration determined that the crude oil vapor pressure limit is preempted by the Hazardous Materials Transportation Act. So Ecology is no longer pursuing the limits on vapor pressure. However, I'd like to acknowledge the industry who worked with us on a vapor pressure reporting standard, and they will be reporting that information in their advance notice of transfer submittals to Ecology. Next slide. An important part of meeting new requirements is the development of Ecology's in-house oil spill model capability. We've hired a modeling and analysis team, and we started a series of webinars to introduce the model development project to tribes and stakeholders and solicit their input. We've seen a great participation in these events so far that we believe will continue as we move through the model development process. That model development, integration, and validation will be complete December 2021, and then that will inform the deliverables that you see on the screen. Next slide. The Saley Sea is a cultural and economic transboundary institution of the Pacific Northwest. The area is home to salmon, shellfish, and orca. It is a vital part of commercial, recreational marine traffic, and is a significant place to tribes and First Nations. An oil spill in the Saley Sea would have devastating effects. So the forum is a venue, or has been a forum, to exchange information on oil spill prevention, preparedness, and response measures between the US and Canada to minimize the risks and impacts of oil spills in the Saley Sea. The forum was a platform for open dialogue for all levels of government from both sides of the border: tribes, First Nations, environmental groups, and industry. It was a non-voting and non-decision-making entity. So this year's forum was the third, that's why I keep saying was, and final hosted by the Pacific States BC Oil Spill Task Force, Ecology, and the BC Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy. A great partnership in putting these together the last few years. The forum looked back on the previous 2 years this year, and then it focused on the 10th year anniversary of Deepwater Horizon, where a lot of enhancements were made here in the Northwest as a result of the outcome of lessons learned from that spill response, the evolving pandemic that we're all dealing with in a transboundary environment, specifically the communication, collaboration, and coordination during an oil spill were discussed, as others have mentioned. There was a strong tribal and First Nations participation throughout the agendas, and the keynote and special sessions focused on tribe and First Nations perspectives that informs our work now and will in the future too. So this year, with our virtual session, I think was a great success. We had several hundred people participating from all over our nations and the world, and the session information is available or will be available on the Pacific States British Columbia Oil Spill Task Force website. So if you missed the October 14th and 15th session, last forum, last of 3, there's where you can find the information. Next slide. As you heard about, as other jurisdictions, COVID has forced us all to make changes in how we do our work. There are a number of challenges, but also some really pretty amazing opportunities for innovation have come about this as well. How we did things in the past won't be how we all do things in the future. I know future agendas will talk more about impacts on drills and spills that we're dealing with in this environment. We also put in place, early on in January 2020, really strong protocols in our program as vessels began to enter our state with concerns of COVID. So strong protocols in place on with our prevention inspectors, how we did drills and exercises with our preparedness group, and our response work has been continued to go strong with our 24/7, 365-day availability. So it's been great to see how successful, creative, and innovative my folks have been in a 100% telework virtual environment, along with the work that we've done with our industry partners to ensure that regulatory requirements have been met and oil is moved safely. I just so appreciate the strong engagement that we've had during this time by tribes, environmental and governmental partners that have been a part of our work through webinars, other virtual platforms, as we move forward with our legislative direction in keeping our environment, cultural resources safe, and our economy strong. So that wraps me up. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dale. Let's see. Just looking at the lineup here. There's one question here for you. The recent conclusion of the Washington Environmental Justice Task Force meetings, how do you anticipate ecology and oil spill prevention work will incorporate these recommendations?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think I'll mention a few things that we have been in action for a long time, and I'll not only talk about briefly about what we've been doing here in the program when it comes to environmental justice, but what we have been doing maybe even through our Northwest area planning work. One area of focus for environmental justice has been through a long, many years of work to continue to develop our relationship with our tribal partners. So that's been a big focus, I think, on the area committee process work. When it comes to our spill prevention, preparedness, and response work, we're thinking about, we have room to grow, but we have been through our prevention work, engaging tribes and First Nations partners. We're reaching out to different demographics to make sure that we are inclusive. We're thinking about how we can do some different interpretation work throughout all aspects of our program. With our geographic response planning in particular, very important and engaging process by the communities to make those plans stronger. So we're looking at how we will communicate broadly and ensure that we have good representation of the demographics that are in those particular response areas. Then on response side, depending on how responses occur, we brought in interpretation help in different times to interpret information on a response. And so that's something we've done for a number of years, and we continue to focus on. But there's just wrought with opportunity to continue to build environmental justice into the work that we're doing. So it's actually been pretty exciting, and it's exciting to see how we move forward in the future.
Great, thank you, Dale. Thanks for your presentation. So that concludes our portion of the agenda of the task force member updates, jurisdictional updates.